It was a quiet afternoon when something extraordinary happened, something that no one, not even the elderly woman sitting alone in her wheelchair, could have predicted. As she watched the soft sway of the grasses and the warm sun on her face, a figure appeared on the horizon, a wild Mustang, its coat gleaming in the afternoon light, moving toward her. At first, she thought it was a trick of the eye. The horse, after all, was wild. It had no reason to approach her, especially not someone like her, an elderly woman confined to a wheelchair, too frail to chase after it, too slow to catch its attention. But it came closer, with an ease that made the woman's breath catch in her throat. She could hardly believe what she was seeing. The Mustang, once a symbol of untamed freedom, was now standing not far from her, eyes locked onto hers as if it knew her, as if it had been waiting for this moment for years. The woman's heart raced, her hands trembling as they hovered over the armrests of her chair. What could it mean? Why was this horse, this creature that had roamed free for so long, drawn to her? She had always loved animals, always felt a deep connection to the wild creatures of the world, but never in her wildest dreams did she think she would find herself face to face with one. Her mind swirled with memories of younger days when she used to ride horses, run through fields without a care in the world. Those days felt so distant now, her body too weak to return to that life. But here, in front of her, stood something that seemed to bring those memories rushing back. The Mustang's gaze was unwavering, almost as though it was inviting her to remember. And then, without warning, the Mustang took a step closer. The woman froze, unsure of what to do next. She wanted to reach out, to touch the animal, but fear held her back. What if it was just a passing curiosity? What if it only wanted to investigate before moving on? But as the Mustang took another step closer, the woman realized something that took her completely by surprise. There was no fear in the animal's eyes, no hesitation. Instead, it seemed to recognize her. As if it knew she was no longer just a woman in a wheelchair, but someone who had once lived with the same freedom and wildness it possessed. Her breath hitched as the Mustang lowered its head slightly, its movements gentle and measured. It wasn't what she expected at all. Was this an impossible dream? Or was something truly extraordinary unfolding before her very eyes? The woman slowly extended a hand toward the horse, her fingers trembling. The world around her seemed to slow down. For a brief moment, she wondered if she could trust this creature, if it could trust her. And in that moment, with the wind softly rustling the grass around them, the Mustang took yet another step forward. Something told her that what happened next would change her life forever. The woman sat in stunned silence as the Mustang continued to approach. Her heart raced, her breath shallow, as she gazed at the wild creature inching closer to her. She had never seen a horse up close in so many years, especially not one as magnificent and untamed as this one. The Mustang's coat shimmered in the sunlight, its muscles rippling beneath its skin with each graceful step. It seemed to glide across the field, a creature so full of life and energy that it made the woman's world feel smaller, quieter, somehow stiller in contrast. She felt a wave of nostalgia rush through her. Her thoughts traveled back to a time when she was young, strong, and capable of running through the fields just as the Mustang was now. She remembered her own horses, how they had been more than just animals to her, they were companions, friends, and symbols of freedom. But that was a lifetime ago, it seemed. After the accident, everything had changed. She had lost so much, her mobility, her strength, her independence, and as the years went by, it felt like life had passed her by, leaving her in this wheelchair, isolated and unsure of herself. But now, sitting in the quiet of this open field, something stirred within her. The Mustang's presence seemed to unlock something deep within her heart. It was as though this wild animal, so full of life and energy, was reminding her of who she once was, of what she had once been capable of. And yet, she couldn't bring herself to believe it. She wasn't that woman anymore. The Mustang's approach made her question whether there was a part of her still alive, still capable of experiencing the joy, the freedom, the connection she had once shared with the world around her. The Mustang halted a few feet from her, its gaze steady and unyielding. Its eyes locked onto hers, almost as if it was studying her, trying to understand who she was, what she meant. The woman's hands clenched the armrests of her wheelchair, and she swallowed hard. Her heart seemed to skip a beat. There was something in the Mustang's eyes, something gentle, something knowing, that made her feel as though this wasn't just any horse. This was the Mustang, the one that had been sent here for some reason she couldn't yet understand. It took another cautious step forward, its hooves making a soft, rhythmic sound as they met the earth. The woman couldn't believe it, this horse, this creature of the wild, was getting closer to her, and there was nothing in its manner that suggested it was frightened. In fact, it seemed entirely at ease, as though it was walking toward an old friend rather than a stranger. Her hands twitched as she debated whether or not to reach out. Could she dare? Could she touch this wild creature that had come from nowhere, this symbol of everything she had lost and longed for? Could she risk it, knowing how fragile her body had become, knowing that a wrong move could hurt her? But something in the Mustang's gaze made her decision for her. The animal's steady, calm presence reassured her. She felt a pull, an instinctive sense of trust, as though this Mustang had come to her not out of random curiosity, but with purpose. She didn't know how, or why, but in this moment, she felt certain of one thing: this Mustang understood her. Without thinking, she slowly raised her hand toward the Mustang. Her fingers trembled, but she was determined. The air between them seemed to hum with an unspoken understanding, a quiet connection that bridged the gap between human and animal, between past and present. For a moment, the Mustang simply stood there, its gaze fixed on her. Then, with the gentleness of a breeze, it reached its head forward and nuzzled her hand. The contact was electric, unexpected, overwhelming, and the woman gasped, her breath catching in her throat. She felt a rush of emotion flood her chest. It was as though the Mustang was offering her something she had lost long ago, the feeling of being seen, understood, and not alone. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she blinked rapidly, trying to hold them back. She hadn't expected this. She had never expected something like this to happen again. Not in her condition. Not at this stage in her life. But here it was, an unexpected miracle. A wild Mustang, reaching out to her, offering a moment of peace, of connection, that she hadn't felt in years. As she stroked its mane, a sense of wonder and gratitude filled her heart. She had no words for what she was feeling. The Mustang stood there, perfectly still, letting her touch it as if it were the most natural thing in the world. And in that moment, she realized something profound: sometimes, the connections we need most come from the places we least expect. Sometimes, the wildest, most untamed parts of the world come to us when we least anticipate it, bringing us back to life in ways we never thought possible. For a brief moment, the woman forgot all her fears, all the worries that had burdened her heart for so long. She was no longer the frail, lonely woman in a wheelchair. She was a part of this wild, untamed world once again, standing side by side with the Mustang that had chosen to share this moment with her. The world around her seemed to fade away, leaving only her and the Mustang, two beings who, for reasons they may never understand, had come together at exactly the right time. As the woman's hand remained gently resting on the Mustang's mane, she marveled at the unexpected peace that had settled over her. She had spent so many years disconnected from the world, isolated in her quiet home, with only memories to keep her company. But now, in this moment, with the Mustang standing before her, she felt as though time had bent in some inexplicable way, bringing her back to life in a way she hadn't thought possible. The Mustang's steady presence was unlike any other animal she had encountered. It was as if it could sense her every emotion, as if it understood the weight of the years that had pressed down on her. She thought back to the days when she was young, vibrant, and full of life. She had always had a special bond with animals, horses especially. They had been her companions through many years, always by her side, their gentle presence soothing her troubled soul. But those days were long gone, replaced by the harsh realities of old age and disability. But now, with the Mustang before her, something was different. This horse wasn't like the others. There was an intensity in its gaze that struck her heart. It wasn't just curious, it was as if it knew her, as though it had been waiting for this moment to happen. She couldn't explain it, but deep down, she felt a connection, one that went beyond the physical and the logical. The Mustang, wild and free, seemed to see her for who she truly was, not just the frail woman in the wheelchair. The moment was fleeting, but it left a lasting impression on her. The Mustang shifted slightly, and for a moment, it seemed to regard her with a quiet intelligence, almost as if it was assessing her. The woman, still unsure of what to do next, hesitated. Could she really trust this wild creature? Could she allow herself to believe that such a bond could exist, even if just for a brief moment? The Mustang didn't pull away. Instead, it took another step closer, its large, powerful frame looming in front of her. She could feel the warmth of its body radiating toward her, and the air between them seemed to thrum with energy. The woman's heart fluttered in her chest. She had never imagined that she would ever feel such a profound connection with an animal again, not after everything that had happened in her life. But here she was, and here it was, this magnificent creature, offering her something that words couldn't capture. She had spent so many years longing for a sense of belonging, for a reminder that she wasn't alone in this world. She had watched people go about their lives, families gathering, children playing, and she had felt like an outsider, stuck in a world that had moved on without her. But the Mustang, it seemed, was offering her something different. It wasn't just about being seen, it was about being understood. In the quiet of the field, with the sun dipping low on the horizon, it was as though the world had momentarily paused, allowing her to find her place in it once more. A small, tentative smile tugged at the corners of her lips. She could feel the weight of her years slipping away, replaced by something lighter, something full of possibility. She had spent so much time in the shadows of her past, but now, with this Mustang standing before her, she realized that the future still had the power to surprise her. As if sensing her shift in energy, the Mustang nudged her hand gently. She gasped, a surge of emotion flooding her chest. It wasn't just the touch of the animal that stirred her so deeply, it was the trust it had placed in her. Wild creatures like this Mustang were known for their independence, their untamable spirit. And yet, this horse had chosen to trust her, to approach her with an openness that was beyond anything she had ever expected. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe that she was worthy of this connection, worthy of being trusted, worthy of being loved. The weight of loneliness, of years spent in isolation, seemed to lift from her shoulders, replaced by a warmth she had almost forgotten was possible. The Mustang stepped back for a moment, and she felt a pang of fear rise in her chest. Was it leaving? Would it walk away as quickly as it had come, leaving her with nothing but the memory of a fleeting moment? But then, to her relief, the Mustang paused, as if waiting for her to make the next move. And so, without thinking, she reached out again, her hand trembling but determined. The Mustang leaned into her touch, its soft muzzle brushing against her palm, a silent promise that this connection was real. The woman closed her eyes, overwhelmed by the sensation. It wasn't just about the Mustang. It was about the moment they were sharing, two beings, each carrying their own burdens, yet finding solace in the presence of one another. In that quiet field, surrounded by the fading light of day, the woman realized that life could still hold unexpected gifts. She had no idea what had brought the Mustang to her that day, but she didn't need to understand it. All she needed to do was accept it. The world had a way of surprising her, of reminding her that even in the darkest times, there was always room for light. And just as quickly as the Mustang had approached, it seemed to settle in, resting beside her, allowing her to feel its warmth, its strength, and its wildness. The bond between them was undeniable, and the woman could only smile as she felt her heart open once again, in a way she hadn't thought possible. The woman sat in silence, her fingers still lightly grazing the Mustang's mane, her heart pounding with a mixture of wonder and disbelief. There was something profoundly comforting about the presence of this wild animal, something that soothed the deep ache in her chest, an ache she had carried for years. As the Mustang stood by her, its head lowered slightly, eyes never straying from hers, the woman felt as though time had stopped. It was as if the world had disappeared, leaving only the two of them, connected in a way she couldn't fully understand. She had always believed in the power of animals to heal, to offer comfort in ways that humans couldn't. But this felt different. The Mustang wasn't just offering her companionship, it felt as though it was giving her something far deeper, something that went beyond the physical. It was as if it understood her in ways no human ever had, sensing the loneliness that had taken root in her heart over the years, the pain of isolation that had become her constant companion. She remembered the days when she had been strong and vibrant, when the world had seemed full of possibilities. She had loved horses, had lived for the moments when she could gallop across the fields, the wind in her hair, the earth beneath her feet. Those days seemed so distant now. Since the accident, everything had changed. She could no longer walk, no longer run, no longer embrace the world in the same way. It had been hard, so hard, to adjust to the reality of her new life. But now, with the Mustang standing before her, she felt as though the weight of the years had lifted, if only for a moment. She hadn't realized how much she had longed for this connection until it was right there, in front of her. The Mustang's quiet presence seemed to fill the empty spaces in her heart, reminding her that, even in her older age, even in her vulnerability, there was still room for connection, still room for love. A part of her wanted to reach out more, to draw the Mustang closer, to pull it into her embrace as though it were a long-lost friend. But she hesitated, unsure if she was worthy of such an intimacy, afraid that she might somehow break the fragile trust that had formed between them. But the Mustang seemed to understand. It remained there, its steady gaze never wavering, as if assuring her that it wasn't going anywhere. Slowly, the woman allowed herself to relax. She felt a deep sigh escape her lips as she leaned back in her wheelchair, looking up at the sky. The stars were just beginning to appear, dotting the sky with soft, distant light. It was a peaceful moment, a rare one, and she allowed herself to savor it. She didn't know how long they stayed like that, the Mustang standing beside her, its head close to hers. Time seemed to blur, and in that stillness, she felt as though they had both shared something sacred, a moment of understanding that transcended words. The wind shifted slightly, and the Mustang stepped back, just a few inches, but it still remained within her reach. The woman's heart fluttered, her mind swirling with questions. Was this just a fleeting moment, a chance encounter that would soon be forgotten? Or was it something more? Could it be that the Mustang had been drawn to her for a reason, that this bond was not just coincidence but fate? She looked at the animal again, its eyes calm and deep, and for the first time in years, she felt a sense of hope stir within her. Hope for something more, hope for a future where she wasn't defined by her limitations, but by the connections she still had the ability to make. The Mustang had come to her not to take anything away, but to remind her that she wasn't alone, that life still had surprises in store for her, even if they came in unexpected forms. The Mustang gently nudged her hand again, and this time, the woman allowed herself to respond. She stroked its neck, the warmth of its coat beneath her fingertips grounding her in the present. The bond between them was unlike anything she had ever experienced, a bond that didn't require words, only an unspoken understanding. In that moment, she realized that she had been waiting for this connection her entire life, and now that it was here, she wasn't going to let it slip away. As the Mustang took another step back, the woman looked up at the sky again, a feeling of peace settling over her. She hadn't expected this moment to change her life, but it had. It had reminded her of everything she had once been, and everything she still could be. The Mustang, wild and free, had shown her that there was still beauty in the world, still the possibility for new beginnings, even in the later stages of life. The woman closed her eyes, breathing in deeply. The Mustang's presence had brought something back to her that she had long thought lost, her connection to the world around her, to the wild, to life itself. She didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time in years, she was no longer afraid of what the future held. She was ready to embrace it, one step at a time. As the Mustang gently nuzzled the woman's hand once more, a soft breeze stirred the grass around them. The tranquility of the moment was broken by the distant sound of footsteps. The woman's head snapped up, startled by the intrusion. She hadn't noticed anyone else around, and the sudden noise felt jarring against the peaceful atmosphere she had found with the Mustang. A man appeared from the nearby tree line, his eyes narrowing as he took in the unusual sight before him. He was tall, dressed in work boots and a faded denim shirt, the kind of attire that marked him as someone who spent most of his days in the fields or on horseback. The man's eyes lingered on the Mustang, his expression filled with curiosity and confusion. The Mustang seemed to sense the man's presence. It straightened up, its ears flicking forward, but it didn't back away. Instead, it remained standing next to the woman, as if it were waiting for something. The stranger took another step forward, slowly and cautiously. "Is everything all right?" he called, his voice tentative. The woman turned toward him, her heart still racing from the surprise of his sudden appearance. She was unsure how to answer him. Did he think she was in danger? Did he realize the bond she had with this Mustang? "Yes," she replied, her voice a little shaky. "The horse, he's with me." The man's brows furrowed as he looked at the Mustang again. He had seen this particular horse before. This was no ordinary Mustang. Wild and independent, it had roamed the area for years, always avoiding human contact. It was the kind of horse that was known for being untamable, for staying far away from people. And yet, here it was, standing just a few feet away from the elderly woman, its trust evident in its calm demeanor. "I've been watching this horse for a while," the man said, his tone a mix of awe and disbelief. "He's never approached anyone like this before." "Never." The woman's eyes widened as she took in the significance of his words. The Mustang was known for its wildness, its independence. It had a reputation for evading human interaction, never staying in one place for long. And yet, here it was, with her, in a moment of perfect stillness. She hadn't understood it at first, but now it was becoming clear, this was no random meeting. The Mustang had come to her for a reason, and whatever that reason was, it was more than just coincidence. The man paused, studying the Mustang with an intensity that seemed to mirror her own. "You're not afraid of him?" he asked, his voice low, almost as if he were speaking to himself. "No," she replied softly, her voice carrying a note of certainty she hadn't realized she still had. I feel like he understands me." The stranger watched her closely, his eyes softening. He seemed to understand, in some way, what she meant. After a moment, he took a few steps closer, still cautious but no longer unsure of the situation. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small piece of apple, holding it out to the Mustang. "Here, boy," he called, his tone gentle. "You want something to eat?" To the woman's surprise, the Mustang's gaze never left her, but it took a step toward the man, cautiously sniffing the air. After a moment, it hesitated, its large eyes flicking from the man to the woman. The man extended the apple piece further, but the Mustang didn't take it. Instead, it took a small step backward, its gaze returning to the woman. The stranger let out a soft chuckle, clearly amused. "Well, I guess he's more interested in you than me," he said, shaking his head in disbelief. The woman smiled softly, a feeling of warmth filling her chest. The connection between her and the Mustang was undeniable. It wasn't just about the horse choosing her, it was about the trust, the silent understanding they shared. It was as if the Mustang had been waiting for her to reach out, to believe in the possibility of this moment. The man, sensing the depth of their bond, took a step back. "I've seen this horse around these parts for years," he said, his voice quieter now. "But I've never seen him act like this. I've never seen him trust anyone." The woman nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving the Mustang. "He's not just any horse," she said, her voice filled with wonder. "He's more than that. I think he came here for a reason." The man considered her words for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. "Maybe you're right," he said finally. "Maybe he's been waiting for someone to come along, someone who understands him." For a long time, neither of them spoke. The Mustang stood close to the woman, its eyes locked onto hers, as though it had something to say, something it couldn't quite put into words. The silence between them felt full of memories, full of longing, and full of connection. The man stood a few paces away, quietly observing the bond between the woman and the Mustang. After a while, the man turned and walked away, giving the two of them space. The woman didn't look after him. She didn't need to. Her attention was focused entirely on the Mustang, on the way it stood beside her, as if it were part of her life once again. She wasn't alone anymore. The Mustang, wild and free, had brought something into her life that she hadn't known she needed, an unexpected gift of connection, trust, and understanding. And for the first time in years, she felt that she wasn't just an observer in her own life. She was living it, fully and completely, in this moment with the Mustang by her side. The man had gone, but the woman remained seated in her wheelchair, her gaze still fixed on the Mustang, which now grazed quietly by her side. The sounds of the field, the rustling of the wind through the grass, the distant calls of birds, seemed far away, as if she were in a world of her own. And, in a way, she was. As the Mustang moved away a little, its tail flicking at the air, the woman closed her eyes and let her mind wander. She felt the breeze on her face, the warmth of the sun on her skin, and for a brief, fleeting moment, it was as if the years of hardship, the isolation, and the loneliness simply vanished. Her mind drifted back to the time before the accident, when she was young and full of life. Her memories felt distant, almost like a dream, but the images were vivid, her strong arms as she held the reins of her horse, the rhythmic sound of hooves on the dirt path as she rode through the open fields. She could almost hear the laughter of her children, feel the warmth of her husband's hand in hers, see the joy in their eyes as they all shared moments of togetherness. She had loved those days. They were simpler times, filled with love and purpose. She had been part of something bigger, family, friends, and a life that had felt full of possibility. The horses had been her escape, her sanctuary, and in many ways, they had been her greatest teachers. She had learned about patience, trust, and the quiet, unspoken bond that can exist between a person and an animal. But then, everything had changed. The accident had come without warning, stealing her independence and her sense of purpose. The accident had taken away her ability to walk, and with it, much of her former life. She had spent years in recovery, months of therapy, and countless nights lying awake in bed, wondering who she was now. She had become someone different, someone weaker, someone who had lost everything she had once loved. The Mustang, still grazing nearby, seemed to break through the haze of her memories. Its presence grounded her, bringing her back to the present. And as she watched it, something shifted in her heart. The pain of the past, the overwhelming sense of loss, began to ebb away, replaced by a quiet understanding. The Mustang wasn't just a random animal, it was something more. It had come to her in this time of her life for a reason. She had always believed that animals, especially horses, had a way of sensing human emotions, of connecting with people in ways that went beyond words. But this Mustang, in its stillness, had shown her something deeper. It wasn't just that it had come to her, it was how it had done so. It had come with an understanding, an unspoken connection, that transcended time and distance. She reached for her coat pocket, where she always kept a small, weathered photo of her family. The picture was worn at the edges, faded with time, but it was still clear in her mind. She had taken it on a bright autumn day many years ago, her husband beside her, their children playing in the field, and her beloved horse standing proudly by their side. In that moment, she had felt so complete, so whole. Her life had been full of love and purpose, and the horses had been a symbol of that vitality. As she touched the photo, the memories flooded back, each one bringing with it a sense of joy and sorrow, of love and loss. She had never allowed herself to dwell on these memories, to feel the weight of all she had lost. She had kept them tucked away, buried beneath the surface, where they couldn't hurt her. But now, as she sat in the presence of the Mustang, those memories seemed to surface naturally, without the fear or hesitation she once had. The Mustang, sensing the woman's quiet grief, walked closer again, its head lowering as if it too understood the depths of her emotions. It nudged her hand gently, its soft breath warming her skin, and she let out a soft sigh. She had spent so many years trying to forget the past, trying to move forward, but now she realized that the past wasn't something to run from. It had shaped her, molded her into the person she was today. And maybe, just maybe, it had brought her to this point, this moment with the Mustang, to remind her that all was not lost. The connection between them was more than just the Mustang's presence. It was the unspoken understanding that passed between them, the way it gently nudged her as if saying, "I'm here. I understand you." She had once believed that she was too old to start over, too broken to find happiness again. But the Mustang had come to show her otherwise. With its presence, it offered her a second chance, not just at life, but at reclaiming the things she had lost, the joy, the connection, the ability to trust and be vulnerable again. The Mustang wasn't here to save her, but rather to remind her of the strength that still lay within her. The strength that had carried her through years of struggle, and the strength that could carry her through whatever came next. For the first time in a long while, the woman smiled, a quiet, tearful smile that spoke of acceptance. She didn't know where this bond would lead or how long it would last, but she knew one thing: she wasn't the same woman she had been when she first arrived here. Something had shifted, something that had been dormant inside her for so long. The Mustang raised its head and nickered softly, as if acknowledging the shift that had taken place. The woman reached out to touch its mane once again, her fingers running through the coarse strands. She knew now that, whatever happened, she was not alone in this world. The Mustang had come to show her that even in the darkest times, life still had a way of surprising her. There was still beauty to be found, still love, still the possibility of connection. And with that realization, the woman felt the weight of the past lift a little more. She had not only survived the years that had come before, but she had learned to live again. As the sun dipped lower behind the horizon, painting the sky with soft hues of orange and pink, the woman felt a deep, unspoken connection grow between herself and the Mustang. Its presence beside her felt more like an old friend, an old companion returning after many years of absence. The air was cool now, but the warmth of the moment still lingered, filling the woman's heart with a kind of peace she hadn't known in years. The Mustang stood still, its eyes never leaving her, a calm serenity emanating from its large frame. It was as if time had slowed to a crawl, as though the world itself was giving them both a space to breathe, to simply be. For the first time in a long while, the woman felt seen, not just as the frail, elderly woman in the wheelchair, but as a person, a being with a history, a heart, and a spirit still alive inside. The Mustang seemed to understand that she had been alone for so long, yearning for something, someone, to recognize her worth again. It wasn't just about the horse being there. It was the way it had come to her, slowly, purposefully, as if it had known the moment was right. The Mustang had chosen her, and in doing so, it had offered her more than just companionship. It had given her the gift of being understood, of being part of something larger than herself again. A quiet, profound understanding passed between them. The woman could sense that the Mustang, despite its wild nature, was not so different from herself. It had known its own struggles, its own hardships, living in the wilderness, surviving on its own, trusting no one. But now, for reasons unknown, it had come to her. It had chosen to trust her. She reached out once more, her hand trembling slightly as she extended it toward the Mustang. The animal stood still, its muscles rippling with strength, but it made no move to back away. Instead, it leaned into her touch, its soft coat brushing against her fingers, and for a brief moment, the world around them seemed to disappear. There was no past, no future, only this moment of quiet connection, a bond that was forged in the stillness of the evening. In that instant, the woman realized that this bond between them was not just about the Mustang offering comfort or companionship. It was about trust, a trust that went beyond words or gestures. The Mustang had recognized her for what she truly was, not just a woman bound to a wheelchair, but a person with a heart full of stories, a spirit that had not yet faded. And the Mustang, in return, had offered her its trust, something rare and sacred. The woman smiled softly, her heart swelling with gratitude. She had lived through so much, and yet, here she was, experiencing something she had not expected, something that seemed too incredible to believe. How had she gone so many years without realizing that moments like this still existed? Moments of connection, of grace, of simple, quiet beauty. Her thoughts turned briefly to the man who had appeared earlier. He had questioned why the Mustang had chosen her. And now, as she sat with the horse, she began to understand. Perhaps the Mustang had sensed something in her that had been hidden away for so long. Perhaps it had come to show her that she still had a place in the world, that she wasn't alone, that life still had meaning, even in the later years. The Mustang nuzzled her hand again, its breath warm against her skin. She closed her eyes, allowing herself to feel the rhythm of its breath, the steady, comforting presence beside her. This moment, this connection, was real. It was as if the universe had conspired to bring them together at just the right time, when both of them needed it most. And for the first time in years, the woman felt a spark of hope, hope that perhaps there was more to life than just surviving, more than just existing. Maybe there was still room for the kind of connection she had once shared with the world, with the animals, and with the people who had come and gone from her life. Her fingers moved slowly through the Mustang's mane, the touch gentle but firm. And for a fleeting moment, the woman felt something stir inside her, something that had been dormant for so long, buried beneath layers of fear, loss, and loneliness. It was the feeling of being alive, truly alive. Not just a shell of who she once was, but a whole person, with the capacity to feel, to connect, to love. The Mustang shifted slightly, standing tall and proud beside her, its posture noble and unwavering. It was as if it too had come to find peace in this moment, to share in the understanding that had passed between them. They were no longer two separate beings, she, the woman in the wheelchair, and it, the wild Mustang. In that quiet, serene moment, they were one, bound together by something that neither of them could fully explain, but both understood. A sense of peace filled the woman's heart as the evening sky deepened, stars beginning to twinkle above them. The world had moved on, life had changed, but there was still beauty in the unexpected, still connection in the most unlikely places. She looked up at the Mustang one last time, her heart full of gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered softly, her voice barely more than a breath. "Thank you for showing me that I'm still here, that I still have something to offer." The Mustang, as if in response, lowered its head once more, nuzzling her gently. The bond between them was unspoken but undeniable. In that moment, she knew that this encounter had meant something more than just a passing moment. It had been a reminder that life, no matter how quiet or still held moments of profound beauty, moments of connection that could change everything. As the evening deepened, the woman sat there, a sense of contentment washing over her. The Mustang continued to stand by her side, its steady presence grounding her in a way that words could not describe. She could feel the weight of the world slowly lifting off her shoulders, as if the wild animal had given her permission to release the burdens of the past. There, in the quiet of the field, everything seemed to fade, except for her and the Mustang. But as the minutes ticked by, the Mustang shifted, its ears flicking nervously. The woman looked up in surprise. It wasn't as if the animal had been restless before, but now there was a subtle change in its demeanor. The Mustang took a slow, deliberate step back, and the woman's heart gave a sharp twist in her chest. Was it leaving? Had their connection already run its course? The Mustang's movements were deliberate, but there was an undeniable reluctance in its gait, as if it were torn between staying and going. The woman felt a pang of sadness flood her, even as she understood that their time together had been precious and fleeting. This wasn't a permanent bond, not in the way she had longed for, but it was a moment, one she would carry with her forever. "Are you leaving?" she whispered, almost afraid to break the spell that had wrapped around them both. But the Mustang did not answer. It simply took another step away from her, this time with more certainty. The distance between them began to grow, and the woman's breath hitched as she felt the last thread of connection slip further away. Her hand instinctively reached out, as if to pull the Mustang back, to hold on to the moment just a little longer. But she knew it wouldn't help. The Mustang was not just any animal, it was a creature of the wild, a symbol of freedom and independence. Its time here was limited, and it had always known that. She couldn't hold it back. The Mustang paused, looking over its shoulder at her. Its gaze met hers for a long, lingering moment. And in that look, the woman saw something she hadn't expected, a deep, silent gratitude. It was as though the Mustang was acknowledging her in a way no words could ever express. It had given her something, a piece of herself that she had thought lost forever. A lump rose in her throat as she fought to hold back the tears. She wasn't ready to say goodbye, but she knew that the Mustang's departure was inevitable. This was its world, not hers. The Mustang could not stay confined by the limits of her wheelchair, and neither could the woman ask it to. It had come to her when she needed it most, when she was at her lowest, and it had reminded her that she was still alive, still capable of feeling. But now it was time for it to return to the wild, to roam free once again. She watched as the Mustang took one final look at her before turning its back and moving toward the edge of the field. Her heart ached, but she understood. This was the way of the world. Nothing in life stayed the same forever. The Mustang had come to her for a reason, but now, its time with her had come to an end. The woman didn't chase after it. She didn't call out. Instead, she sat quietly, her eyes fixed on the Mustang as it moved further and further away, its silhouette growing smaller against the fading light. She felt a bittersweet sense of acceptance wash over her. This moment had been a gift, one that could never be replaced. When the Mustang disappeared into the horizon, the woman sat in silence for a long while. The field was still. The world around her seemed unchanged, but she knew better. The world had shifted. She had shifted. There was a moment of emptiness, a fleeting sadness that tugged at her heart. But just as quickly, she felt something else, something profound. She had been reminded of her own strength, of her own capacity for connection, of her ability to experience life in ways she had forgotten. She had spent so many years longing for something, someone, to bring her back to life. The Mustang had done that. It had shown her that, even in the twilight years of her life, there was still room for joy, for connection, for unexpected beauty. It had reminded her that she was not just an old woman in a wheelchair, but a person still capable of experiencing the wonders of the world, even in the simplest of ways. As the last traces of sunlight faded into the night sky, the woman closed her eyes, a soft smile tugging at her lips. She felt the warmth of the Mustang's presence linger in her heart. No, it wasn't a permanent bond, but it had been enough. In that brief, fleeting encounter, the Mustang had given her something she had not known she needed, the reminder that life was still full of wonder, that she still had the ability to connect with the world around her. With that thought in her heart, the woman slowly wheeled herself back toward the path that led to her home, the feeling of peace settling over her. The world had not forgotten her, and perhaps, just maybe, it had more to offer than she had ever imagined. The days that followed were quieter, more reflective. The woman spent her time gazing out of her window, looking over the field where the Mustang had once stood by her side. She could still feel its presence, the energy of their connection lingering in her heart. It was as if the world had shifted subtly, and though everything around her seemed the same, she knew she had changed. The Mustang had come into her life like a force of nature, unexpected, wild, and free. It had shown her what it meant to be truly alive, to trust again, to connect with something larger than oneself. But now it was gone, and in its absence, she found herself standing at the crossroads of reflection and renewal. The memories of their brief but profound encounter stayed with her, a silent reminder that life, no matter how quiet or still, always had room for unexpected beauty. It wasn't just the Mustang's visit that had changed her, though. It was everything that had followed, the way she had allowed herself to feel, to remember, and to open her heart to the possibility of connection again. She had spent so many years locked in a cage of grief and regret, feeling like the best years of her life had passed her by. But the Mustang had reminded her that even in her later years, there was still joy to be found, still lessons to be learned, and still moments of grace to be experienced. The woman often thought back to the man who had appeared that evening, the one who had spoken of the Mustang's strange behavior. He had witnessed something she couldn't fully explain, something that transcended the physical world. The Mustang had come to her for a reason, and perhaps that reason was to awaken something deep within her, a reminder that she still had the ability to experience the wild beauty of the world, even in the quiet of her later years. She would never forget the Mustang's steady gaze, the way it seemed to understand her, as if it knew the pain she had lived through, the years of isolation, and the longing that had been buried beneath her surface. And when it left, it hadn't just taken with it a moment of connection, it had left her with a sense of purpose, a spark of life that had been dormant for so long. With time, the woman began to take small steps toward re-engaging with the world around her. She spent more time outside, taking short walks in the fresh air. She visited the local animal shelter, where she volunteered to care for the animals, the same animals that had once been her companions. She began to smile more, to laugh more, and to feel as though the weight of the years was not so heavy after all. The Mustang had shown her that there was still more to her life than the limitations she had imposed on herself. There was still room for love, connection, and adventure. In the evenings, as the sun set behind the hills, she would sit quietly by her window, her thoughts wandering back to the Mustang. She smiled as she thought of it, proud of the time they had shared, knowing that their brief encounter had left an imprint on her heart. It had been a reminder that life, even in its twilight, still held surprises. It was not about the years gone by, but the moments that still lay ahead, waiting to be lived. She had learned that life was not about holding on to what once was, but about embracing what was still possible. The Mustang had taught her that there was still freedom to be found, even in her wheelchair, even in her old age. Freedom was not about running across a field, it was about finding peace within oneself and accepting that the present moment, no matter how fleeting, could still be a beautiful gift. And so, as the seasons changed and the years passed, the woman carried with her the lesson the Mustang had imparted, that life, no matter how unexpected or fleeting, still had the power to surprise, to heal, and to awaken something deep inside. She looked out at the field one final time, her heart full of gratitude. The Mustang was gone, but its spirit lived on in her, a quiet, constant reminder that the greatest journeys often come when we least expect them. With that, she smiled, content and at peace, knowing that she had not only survived her years of hardship but had rediscovered the joy of simply being alive. Meaningful life lesson. The true beauty of life lies not in the past or the future, but in the unexpected moments of connection we experience in the present. Sometimes, the things we need most come to us when we least expect them, like a wild Mustang, reminding us that no matter where we are in life, there is still room for growth, for love, and for connection. Even in the later stages of life, there is always something new to discover, something beautiful to embrace.